if you're able to, we're having a brunch on April 22nd. So we're gonna have some breakfast, and you can meet us in person if you like to.
Oh,
We'll send you more
cool,
information.
yeah.
Thank you so much
All right,
again.
guys, I'm gonna go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for the shout outs. And Brother TK, peace out. See you guys later.
That's special. All right. So if you want to take just a moment to kind of inhale, exhale, kind of turn your head left and right, because we've got a presenter and I want to give it our full attention. And I know we went through some great introductions, which I always think is great for you all to kind of connect with each other. I know for myself, sometimes I work in a silo and I have never felt more blessed than actually being able to work with Dr. Giddings, because I'm able to see some of the things that are different as well as some of the things that are similar. So I'm really thrilled about this opportunity to be able to share this presentation with you. And we have Ms. Campbell, we have interns from both counselor education as well as social work. So we really want to make sure that we're having a nice blend. So with that, we have sent out the introduction of Mr. Harry Morgan. Mr. Morgan is an MSW. We did put his introduction in. He graduated with his undergrad as well as his master's in social work from Morgan State. Went to the school named after him, right? I mean, that's pretty hot. He is literally Mr. Morgan, and he's out here in the streets doing big things. And I thought that it would be a great opportunity for you to meet him and hear about him, because when I hear about some of the topics that you all are interested in, I feel like it's working with various populations. And the goal for this, which is a training grant, is to always give you additional opportunities to learn and kind of strengthen what you're already doing, because you already are doing amazing things. So this is just like the tahini on your stuff. You saw it, I sprinkled it on. So Mr. Morgan, you have co-host authority, so you can share your screen and you can get started. And we're excited to have you as a part.
Well, thank you for that marvelous introduction, Dr. Jones. And again, I just am excited to be here and listening to all of you share about your experiences and where you are in your career and in your matriculation at your university. It takes me back to about 13 years ago when I was getting ready to graduate from Morgan State University, and where I was and what I thought I would be doing, and completely the opposite of that. And I second what the dean says about when you walk into a room, being able to share your skill set, what you do and how well you're able to do it, and what experience you have in that. And so just to share a little bit about myself, as I said, I graduated from Morgan in 2011. I worked with the Department of Social Services in Maryland for about 10 years. I also have some experiences working at Kennedy Krieger with youth and families who have experienced traumatic brain injuries and also autism. And then also I've transitioned over to work in the community mental health, working in the PRP programs, as well as outpatient mental health. And then I've recently transitioned to the University of Maryland School of Social Work in their Resource Development Center for Resource Parents, training families of origin or bio families, as well as resource parents on positive parenting strategies. But at my core, my passion has always been for LGBTQ advocacy, one, for lived experience, and two, just because I do believe that population just needs assistance and needs help. And so I'm also a master trainer with the Human Rights Campaign, which is one of the nation's leading organizations on LGBTQ advocacy. And so I have traveled prior to COVID and virtually during COVID, training other institutions, other family serving agencies on LGBTQ inclusion and things like that. And so listening, I normally start trainings or conversations kind of asking the same question that the dean asked, right? You know, about your proudest moments, about your strengths, about where you are in your career. And so it hits differently when it comes from the dean, right? And so you all responded. So I got to sit back and listen to hear everything you said. I didn't have to pull that information out of you on this Saturday morning. So she made that so much easier for me. But what I heard was that you all have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of skills, right? You are working in the behavioral health field. You all are doing clinical counseling, community health work, faith-based work. You're working with kids on the autism spectrum. I'm hearing school-based work, DEI work, social justice, homelessness advocacy, reentry, sexual health and wellness, substance use and abuse, in the medical field, and just advocacy, right? This is all in this Zoom room right now. This is what you all are doing. And so I'm honored to hear, to just be in this space with you all, because we get detached from this work, right? Being in the field, and we get detached from some of our hopes and aspirations. And so hearing you all talk, I know that you have so many skills and so many wonderful things that you will be bringing to the field. And when I think about the work that you do, I know that you're working with LGBTQ people, right? Their youth and their families. And so I know that you all are, I feel like I'm going to be preaching to the choir today, but I really want to just give you all some foundational concepts and some strategies on how to work with families, how to think about it in that interprofessional way that you all are constantly thinking about, and even maybe give you kind of a snapshot around what may be happening like in Georgia around LGBTQ things. So I invite you all to continue to bring that energy, to talk, to share, to ask questions, to debate me, if you will. Bring all of that energy into the room, because one of the things I like to also do is talk about group agreements. And one of my group agreements is that I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. And so I invite you all to share your information and your knowledge with me as well. And so as I begin to share my screen, as you can see, I wanted to talk to you today about foundational concepts of working with LGBTQ plus youth and families, and just using it from an interprofessional approach. So I really want to look at it on a, on different levels, from a systemic level, from just a direct level approach that you all have, and really hear your input and share the information that I have. Can you see my screen? Okay, all right, good. Okay, good. So as always, today's vision is really to just give you a basic understanding of LGBTQ identities and experiences. I want to encourage the participants, create a safe space to think about those affirming environments. I also want to have you all begin thinking about LGBTQ inclusion from a systems level. Again, as I shared, I always like to create that space by using group agreements. I invite you all to think about, owning and your intention and your impact, those statements and words that you want to share, using I statements, speaking from your own experience, as well as anything that's shared in here. We want to take the learning from it. We don't want to take stories. We want to really, the learning leaves, but the stories can stay. And then also replace judgment with wonder, right? As I stated before, I don't have all the answers. So if you have a question or you have something you'd like to say, you might want to start with, I wonder what Harry means by that. I wonder what Dr. Jones means by that. I wonder what, I only see Nelson, I'm saying what Nelson means by that, if you want to share. So if we all can agree to these group agreements and creating that safe space, I think that we'll have a great presentation. We kind of already went through an icebreaker with the dean, so I'm not going to drag you to that again. And so I'd like to start with the conversation around SOGI. If anyone has ever heard this terminology before, SOGI.
I've heard of it.
Oh, somebody said they heard of it. I can't see, but thank you so much. What did you hear about SOGI?
I mean, it's just different. Sexual orientation is different from your gender identity, and your gender expression is different from your gender identity as well. That's basically what I heard, is that sexual, your sex and gender are two totally different things. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ty. That is exactly what SOGI is all about. SOGI is about separating the conflation between sexual orientation and gender identity, which we so often tie so closely together, right? Just because you know someone's sexual orientation does not mean you know how they identify, right? And so by talking about SOGI, when we think about the acronym LGBTQ, it puts everything together, right? When you talk about trans experiences, it's different. It's a different experience versus someone who may identify as lesbian or gay. That is, or bisexual. Those are different experiences. And so the term SOGI is an academic term. And so it really comes from that. It's really about separating that conflation. Like, we don't want to mix those things. So thank you, Ty. And I wanted to kind of do a quick, maybe true or false, just to kind of see where you are. And when Dr. Jones asked me to come speak to you all, I was like, what am I going to talk about? And so I went to GLSEN, which is the Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network, which kind of gave me a snapshot of what's going on in the Georgia school system. And this really speaks to why SOGI is important. So I want to kind of do a true or false to see what you all think about this data that may or may not be true. And the first one says that the vast majority of LGBTQ students in Georgia regularly have heard anti-LGBTQ remarks. No right or wrong answer, but true or false?
True.
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 Anybody want to share why they think that's true?
I know for me in particular, I work at NASM, and the demographic that we predominantly service is Black and Brown MSM. And I know a lot of times in counseling, in that intake process, we do talk about past experiences, particularly in school. And that is something that a lot of people had to encounter, whether they were identifying or not identifying yet. They still heard them, so they knew internally that this was making them feel some type of way, whether that be sad or angry. That was something that they definitely had to encounter. And NASM, we don't necessarily have an acronym for it. It has been passed along ownership, so that has changed. So I would love to, but
I'm sorry. I only wanted it if it was there. I think I've asked you that before. I apologize.
I'm sorry, Dr. Jones, you were saying?
Oh, I was asking Ms. Bonds to share with NASM because I wanted you to know, but I think she had shared with me before, like it's not necessarily an acronym that we know.
Oh, okay.
So I was saying, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. All right. And thank you, Andrea, for sharing that reflection, because it speaks to the data, right? 57% of the youth surveyed said that they regularly heard that school staff make homophobic remarks, right? That's 57%. And 74% heard negative remarks about someone's gender expression, right? Those are pretty high numbers, right? More than half of the youth surveyed in both experiences. The second, most LGBTQ students in Georgia experience anti-LGBTQ victimization at school. True or false?
I would have to say true.
True. Would you like to share a little bit about why you feel that's true, Ty?
Sorry, I changed my AirPods died, but a lot of the students that, a lot of the kids that, oh, maybe I'm muted.
No,
Am I muted?
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, I couldn't hear you guys. I'm sorry. But a lot of the kids, because I worked with kids as well that are from Georgia, and a lot of them would, tell me that they experience victimization or, experience being bullied because of who they are, because you're 10 years old and you identify as transgender, or you identify as lesbian or gay, bisexual, and a lot of children don't really understand. Other children haven't been educated on what that really means to have that type of difference, understanding differences in everybody else, so not a lot of parents are educating their kids that you may meet somebody that identifies as this, or she, her, they, them, he, him, but they do get that from adults too. I've been told from kids that they've experienced also from adults that they're often treated differently in the classroom, or so.
Thank you so much, Ty. That also speaks to this data. This snapshot is from 2021, but the top 4 types of victimization or harassment that youth in Georgia have experienced within the school system has been online harassment during school hours, verbal harassment, physical harassment, and physical assault, right? This is during school hours. This is data. The third, many LGBTQ students in Georgia reported discriminatory policies or practices at their school.
I'll say true.
Who said that? Does that? Courtney?
Yes. I wanted to definitely say true on this one, because one of the things that, I teach and work at the Mount Vernon School, which is a private school.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously one of the policies for private school is for boys to wear pants or shorts, girls have to wear skirts. And so one of the policies that we were advocating for is one of my roles as a director of diversity and inclusion is just equitable access for all students. And pants or shorts is not a LGBTQ thing, right? It's not for students who want to express their gender in a certain way. It's everybody wears pants and shorts. So one of the things that we were able to do as a department was change the policy for the school uniforms to make it to where that any student can wear shorts or pants if they choose to. And that is just long as it's within the, the length guidelines, which was super beneficial for our students. And you started to see students as a teacher, you start to see them more comfortable in the classroom. So you have it where I'm on an admin side where you don't see those things, but then the benefit, and specifically speaking of 2 students that I had who were wearing skirts, and then when they were able to wear shorts, the comfort they just had just sitting in the classroom. They're able to not worry about if their skirt is, twisted or if it's sitting down or, they have to sit with their legs. It's just that overall comfort that makes it easier for me as a teacher in that role to import information in their minds when they're not focused on what they're wearing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you for contributing, because I wrote down your name, I circled it, I put DEI, I highlighted it. I was going to find you at some point during this discussion, so I crossed that off my list. But thank you for sharing that, because that reflection really speaks to what the whole purpose of talking about LGBTQ advocacy, correct? Like, why it's important for people to be themselves and to dress in a way that aligns with their expression, right? Which is why we separated Soji a few minutes ago, right? When you talk about wearing shorts or pants does not tell you who you're attracted to. It does not tell you how you identify. It just tells you what you like to wear. And so the data shows that 31% of youth surveyed felt like they were restricted from their expression. 33% felt like they were discriminated at school in relation to their gender. And 48% of transgender or non-binary students in particular experience gender-based discrimination in Georgia.
Yep, that's good. That's really good information. And you'll be hearing me tap in because this is a lot of the work that I'm doing like I said, as my role. Since Dr. Jones said brag, I'm gonna go ahead and brag anyway. So we do a lot of work in my spaces. I really want to create equitable sources. So a lot of things are, again, it's those language and those barriers that people say that they assume that something has an undertone of LGBTQ. No, it doesn't. It's just, why are pants required only for boys? Or why do we have to gender separate things by gender? So I'll be chiming in a lot because there's a lot of the work that I want to do to help self-efficacy for my middle school students.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And please chime in. And so last but not least, many LGBTQ students did not have access to in-school resources and supports.
True. Can I answer?
Yes, Kelisa.
Okay, so I've been wanting to talk about this for a hot minute.
Talk about it.
Because I'm into reproductive care and things of that nature. So a lot of the work that I've researched and talked about has to do with religious associations and policy and how that limits access. So for instance, with LGBTQ students, a lot of the time because of religious associations in the South, we're unable to talk about anatomy, we're unable to talk about hormones, treatment, even to understand like who you are gender and sexual orientation wise, which could benefit not only LGBTQ students, but cisgendered students as well. And so we see certain resources being stripped away, not only in terms of like gender identity with LGBTQ students, but like for students in regards to sex ed, preventative measures, measures that reduce domestic violence and STI contraction, all because we're unable to access these resources and support based off of policies that are based off of religious associations, which that moral compass should not be placed into policy, but we should have more like DEI efforts that include everyone. So that way, the most vulnerable populations like LGBTQ students can get the resources that will save them from suicide ideation and things of that nature. So I am very big on this one. This is kind of the type of work that I want to go into, but I would definitely say true.
That absolutely is true. And thank you for that reflection, Kalisa. And so what the data shows is that 10% of schools in Georgia have inclusive curriculums, right? Around sex education, around all of those different things. Less than 19% have GSAs, gay straight alliances. When students were surveyed, less than 46% were able to identify 6 or more supportive educators. Less than 22% were able to identify supportive administration. And 7% of the schools in Georgia have comprehensive anti-bullying policies. 7%. And so what happens is that often when people talk about Georgia, they talk about Atlanta, right? It's like, oh, Atlanta, it's so gay friendly. It's that. Georgia is a very conservative state. And it's the whole Georgia. You have to think about that as a whole. And so if you actually look at the data, you look at what's happening, Georgia is not very progressive as far as LGBTQ inclusion, as far as anti-bullying or harassment. Even as far as data that I saw around generally no laws protecting people from discrimination at all based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's not even for youth, that's for adults as well, right? So when you hear this data, and this goes for anyone, I saw someone raise their hand, I don't know if that was a clap, it went away. What jumps out at you when you hear this data?
I think that might have been Miss Wells.
Miss Wells.
Were you going to say something, Miss Wells? Or
yes, it was. Thank you. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, so you use the language comprehensive anti-bullying versus just an anti-bullying. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two?
Absolutely. So I was going to share, if you go to GLSEN's website, they have model education agency for bullying and harassment prevention policies. And so really those bullying policies address, bullying, harassment, cyberbullying. They do have specific scopes and responsibilities that include how to assist LGBTQ youth in case of specific examples, whether it be staff, whether it be students. Also, it talks a little bit specifically, I'm trying to pull out the example. I can send it out afterwards to you all so you can kind of see what the model example can look like. But a lot of anti-bullying policies don't really address it. If they don't have them at all, or they don't address anything. So it's either or. So having a bullying policy, you're already a step above most, right? You have some. So when I just say comprehensive, it generally can kind of spell out like policies, procedures, what to do, safety protocols if something happens, whether it be like a staff or youth, and specifically spelling out what is considered bullying, especially around LGBTQ identities and experiences, right? Because if that's not spelled out, then it's not really as comprehensive as it could be.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, that's a great question. And so really I wanted to bring this data, right? Because sometimes stories help connect the information, right? When we talk about the importance of why it's to talk about LGBTQ advocacy. And again, this is just a snapshot for schools in 2021. We haven't talked about hospitals. We haven't talked about prisons. We haven't talked about community work or faith-based organizations. And so this really speaks to the need about why it's important to have discussions and talk about it. I can't tell you how many times I go into spaces and people say, why are we talking about LGBTQ stuff? Or why do I have to ask about someone's sexual orientation or gender identity? This is why, because if it's not talked about, if it's not asked about, the services are not being rendered and not being addressed. When we think about dimensions of identity, when I'll talk a lot about later on, is that we look at race, we look at ethnicity, we look at sex, we look at finances, we look at mental health, veteran status, all of those things. But we typically leave out SOGI. We don't ask about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And so for those of you who have partners, who have significant others in your lives, how important and crucial are those people to your life and your peer relationships and your circle? And how do we miss that a large portion of the people that we work with when we don't address those issues, when we don't ask those questions? And so that brings us to the dimensions of identity, right? When we're talking about intersectionality, right? I'm not an intersectionality expert, but it is a great framework to use to begin to look at. I saw Kelisa was excited. You know a lot about intersectionality. You want to tell us what you know about it?
So my undergraduate degree is in women, gender, and sexuality studies.
Yes.
And one of our major frameworks that we utilize is intersectionality. And it discusses your various identities and how maybe you are affected by each of those identities. So for instance, if you're a Black cisgendered bisexual woman, then your sexuality and your gender identity, as well as your race, all have an impact on your overall well-being, and access to like your future. So this is one of those other topics that I love. And I also love Miss Audre Lorde. Amazing scholar within that work. So yes, that's a little bit about intersections and intersectionality.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that great summarization, Kelisa. And I love Audre Lorde as well. And so that's why I use this quote: there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. And for the exact example that Kelisa used is, we can't separate our identities, right? I woke up today as a Black cisgender gay man, and those identities intersect, and I can't separate myself from those, correct? And so it's almost like the potential or the impact of those identities, the likelihood of my oppression, all of those things are connected. And so these are very small examples, because there are multiple identities that you can discuss. But these are just kind of a snapshot of what that can look like, right? When we're thinking about intersectionality, sexuality, class, gender, ethnicity, race, age, religion, language, education, right? And how all of these things, if you look at it from an intersectional approach, how these identities overlap. And these experiences help us understand the complexity of the nature of the cases, right? And so what do you think the impact would be if we began to look at our the people that we serve from an intersectional approach? Somebody other than Kelisa. What do you think the impact would be?
I think we'd be able to have a better understanding of their whole life, especially in therapeutic spaces. We can really meet them where they are, address that person and environment that we talk so much about in social work.
Thank you.
Excuse me?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And so, and I think that it also helps us understand what modality would maybe be best appropriate, considering their intersectionality.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ravonna. It's about understanding the people that we serve, essentially, right? Respecting their experiences, understanding the discrimination that they've experienced, understanding the likelihood of the disadvantages of the barriers that they might occur, right? Because a lot of times when people come in, we're like, oh, we're going to help you, we're going to provide you with these services, with no real understanding of what that life may have looked like, or what it could look like, what they've experienced. And so it really just takes a step back. It's another form of assessment. It's another approach. It's another way to look at our cases to kind of get a full picture, as you said, Yvonne. And so I invite you to look at some kind of public examples, right? When we think about intersectionality and how that can be viewed, right? Here we have 4 examples of people who identify in the LGBTQ community, different experiences, different reception in the community and in the media. I would like to note different financial situation for most of them, but I would like to invite you to think about, like, for some of these people, if they have not been into entertainment industry, if they were not in a different economic or tax bracket, how would they fare with that reception? And so when we think about Caitlyn Jenner, when we think about Zaya Wade, when we think about Little Nas X, when we think about Ellen, and from an intersectional approach, what differences do you see in their stories? If you don't know about them, I can also share some information.
Well, as far as Zaya Wade goes, Zaya Wade, what I think is really interesting about their story is the family dynamic. And like when we're dealing with clients, we have to consider, is the wants and the needs of the child, but also looking at the entire family system and how does that child's identity impact the family system, and then how much support do the parents need, for example. And then, somebody like Caitlyn, who, was a whole Olympian, a whole gold medalist, and then how vastly different, like how, the perceived pendulum swing, if you will, and then their political conservatism. Absolutely. And how their political conservatism, it almost flies in the face of their new identity, for example. So I think that those 2 cases in particular were most interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for that reflection, Yvonne. And that's exactly the pieces that I want to draw out, right? For Zaya Wade, for those of you who are not familiar with the story, Zaya Wade is a young trans youth, and she has come out as trans, and she is living her full self, and she has full acceptance of her family. Social media has trashed her and her family, many negative receptions, a lot of negative reception within the media, often discussions about the family acceptance that Yvonne has talked about, and the child is flourishing, the child is being themselves, and people are also continuously talking about how harmful the decision is to allow her to live in her full self, or to begin her transition, or to live as she would like to, versus Caitlyn, as Yvonne pointed out, was maybe a 60-something-year-old trans woman who lived her entire life, and then decided to transition, had a family, a reality star, lots of money, all kinds of things. And within a year or 2 years of transitioning, was named Woman of the Year, right? Of how vastly those experiences are. And then the ability to then turn around and still maintain a very conservative position on lots of things, probably a lot of the same policies and things that could affect people of the community that she now belongs to.
And can I add, I just wanted to piggyback off of Yvonne and you, and highlighting that Zaya is a child. And so we're seeing in the news a lot of changes that are happening in the school system. And of course, because of their class and financial abilities, Zaya might not actually attend a school, but the education that she is provided is the same as other individuals as well. And the dynamic between her living with her father and his wife, which is her stepmother, versus the complications that they're having internally within their family with her mother. So that's a big piece of it too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And so let's pull away the finances, right? Imagine that these are cases that walked into many of the agencies that you work in today. They are within the same, live in the same communities. What do you think the difference in these stories would be if you remove that dimension of their identity?
I mean, I think if you remove that dynamic, I think that's we go back to equity, right? Or would they have access to the resources that they do have because of their social status and their economic status versus not having them? I look at Lil Nas X and Ellen, where, okay, you got the industry and the entertainment industry who can be or are kind of now opening their doors a little bit. But at the time that, of course, when Ellen was at her show, her actual like TV show, where she came out on her show and still was really under the radar until really she got her talk show. And then here Lil Nas X, and if I'm recalling correct, like he came on the music industry, no one knew that he belonged to that community. And then so do they have to, of course, I'm assuming that LGBTQ have to suppress who they are so they can break through the door and then be able to express themselves. So if they were who they are authentically, were they able to be these great people from the beginning? And so that was always my wonder as how we create more, equitable access and resources for not just people with financial status, but people who do not.
Exactly. That's it, right? The equity and beginning to look at people from an intersectional approach can help you begin to think about that, right? Lil Nas X had the biggest single of 2019. I couldn't go anywhere without hearing that song. Kids were singing it, YouTube, TikTok, everywhere. It was I was over it. And the minute he came out, he was demonized, he was trashed, it was awful, he's a one-hit wonder, all of these different things, right? Strictly because of sexual orientation, gender identity, and his expression. So I just wanted to kind of highlight these as examples when you begin to think about like intersectional approach, the LGBTQ experiences of people, both lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans, right? Any other, let's see. So we've used a lot of terminology. I don't want to kind of belabor the point because you all probably know a lot of these. We talked about SOGI, the acronym for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. When we talk about the acronym LGBTQIA, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual. Does anyone have any questions in particular about any of these terminologies listed? And this is not an exhaustive list, right? I just want to let you know.
I do have a question about a term that I don't see on here that is typically associated with LGBTQ plus, and it's pansexual. And if you can like go into a little more detail about what that consists of.
Yeah, pansexual, panromantic. A lot of times when you talk about LGBTQ terminology, I try to look at the prefix, right? And so pan meaning all. Most people who identify as pansexual, and again, from my experience, this might not be the best language, they are people who have the potential to be attracted to all sexes, right? And when I say all sexes or all genders, often people get confused by that, right? And so just for example, you may have someone who is, who identifies as male, someone who identifies as female, someone who identifies as a trans male or trans female, someone who identifies as non-binary, right? Those are just 5 gender experiences that I just shared with you. A person who is pansexual, really speaks to their attraction to the person. And so they have the ability, or they are attracted to romantically, they could be romantically, physically, or sexually attracted to any of those genders, which could be different than, let's just say, like a heterosexual person, right? They're just attracted to the opposite sex. A bisexual person would be someone who's attracted to just 2 genders, right? And a gay person would be someone who's attracted to the same sex. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions around terminology?
Yes, what's intersex?
So intersex is a term that kind of came about because you may be more familiar with the term hermaphrodite, right? And hermaphrodite is someone who it's an outdated term, but an intersex person is someone who may be born with one or more sex characteristics of the same sex, right? So you could present female completely, and you may have been born with genitalia, chromosomes, or hormonal things that also present male as well. So again, before it would be considered, the term would be hermaphrodite, but it's an outdated term. Intersex would be more of a current term.
Thank you.
Also, when using the term queer, it's always it's a reclaimed term, right? So it's a term that the LGBTQ community is kind of reclaiming and using as an identity. So just be careful or minding, because for people who maybe be of a different era, queer used to be a derogatory term, right? And so be sure when using these identities or terminology that it is also the terminology that the person has self-identified with. So also, somebody had a question?
I have a question. And it may be a question, maybe not, that can't be answered in these slides, but how, in the research or in your experience, how has these studies and this work worked with immigrant families or non-American, the non-American population? Because we in America have the freedom and the luxury, if you will, to be able to identify ourselves as we are. But there are people from other parts of the world that do not have that and have not historically been able to have that. So do you have any, or can you speak to that at all?
I can say that they are experiencing the same situations that we do have here in America, right? I have had cases and families of people who have moved here from other places, and a lot of faith-based work, a lot of cultural norms that you kind of have to push through to kind of assist people, even sometimes people who themselves identify as part of the LGBTQ community, and they may also be from that place, sometimes hold their own internal homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia of themselves because of past experiences or cultural norms. I would say that on an international level, lots of work and infrastructure still needs to be done, right? Even this month in Uganda, a policy was a law that was just recently passed to criminalize LGBTQ behavior, even to the point of the death penalty, right?
I saw that. That was such a travesty.
This month in 2023. Right. And so there are national and international organizations that work to help those families and do legal stuff, but it's a task, right? That's maybe something to put on the radar, right? When we're thinking about that intersectionality, how we're connecting that approach, and the need to do the work that in 2023, even in Florida, there's a Can't Say Gay bill, right? In 2023, Can't Say Gay bill that is affecting parental rights and inclusion for youth in Florida, as well as you look on international level, Uganda, 2023, right? A criminalized bill. So I don't have a response to necessarily say that what it is doing, but I think it speaks to what the need is, because clearly there's still lots of work that needs to be done. And it speaks to and it speaks to why LGBTQ inclusion work is important, right? When people walk into those spaces and say, why? This is why. I just also kind of wanted to kind of break down a little bit the conversation around sexuality versus gender, because I still think it's important to kind of not conflate that, right? That sexuality includes attraction, it includes identity, and it includes behavior, where gender could include your sex assigned at birth, your gender identity or your gender expression. If you note, I said sex assigned at birth because we always want to use best practice language. And for some people, they may not want to say born female or born male, right? They may feel that they were born who they are. They may also feel like better language would be when they were born, the sex that they were assigned at birth, right? Because we may not know. We love our babies. Our babies are beautiful. They're cute. They're handsome. They're pretty. But we don't know how they identify until they're able to tell us, right? Sexual orientation, we kind of went through those. So that also leads into the discussion around the gender binary. Anybody ever heard this term before, the gender binary? Anyone familiar with it? So the gender binary, oh, somebody want to say something?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
What you familiar with it about, Andrea? Tell me what you know about the gender binary.
So at NASM, we did have to take a course and we did an experience where everyone just talked about how they felt about gender binary first before they informed us a little bit more about what it was. But honestly, it's just, well, from the way I think about it, it's like a cycle kind of male and female, masculine and female energy, or presenting energy, and understanding that if you are male or female, it doesn't matter. You don't necessarily have to express that way if that's not what's comfortable for you. You can have a gender and express it differently than others assume or expect you to.
Yeah, so you're really, really close, right? You have the intention behind what the gender binary talks about, but the gender binary is actually the opposite. It really speaks to the expectations, the structures, and of what we're expected of males and females to do. And those instances that exist outside the binary is when we begin to have those discussions and when we begin to our mind is blown, right? So I often ask people, right, if you walk into a store and they have a extra small and 3X, what are you going to buy? Those are your only two options, and you have to buy something. What you going to buy?
It's the extra small for me.
It's the extra small for you,
but
right?
It's not.
But will that extra small fit? Would you like that extra small? Do you feel comfortable in the extra small, right? It's really just the only option you have, right? And so the gender binary is just that, right? It really speaks to, as Andrea said, if that you are born male, you're expected to have male hormones, male genitalia, secondary sex characteristics as a male. Therefore, you identify as a man. Therefore, you're going to have the mannerisms, the role, and the social context of what masculine means. And therefore, you must be attracted to women. That is the binary for men, right? For females, that would mean that you are born female, you identify as female, you will express yourself in a feminine way, and therefore you must be attracted to men. Now, we all know people or ourselves who this may not be true for, right? Because we may know a woman who was born a woman, or a assigned sex female at birth, who identify as a woman and may dress masculinely and still be attracted to men, right? And therefore, she is immediately outside of this binary. She's immediately outside of that expectation. I often use the example of my mom. Growing up, my mom wore a very, very, very short haircut and blonde hair my whole life. And people often mistook her for a lesbian my whole life because she wore a short haircut. There are women who don't like to wear makeup. There are men who like to get manicures and pedicures, right? There are men who wear makeup. There are all types of different expressions, right? And so the binary is very limited. You don't cross that line. And so this does not only impact LGBTQ people, or it also impacts cisgender and heterosexual people as well. Have you yourself ever felt limited by this binary, by having to be feminine, by having to dress a certain way or be a certain way just because you're a woman or just because you're a man?
I'll chime in. I'm sorry.
Yes. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'll chime again. So Yes, I identify as a cis woman binary, but I played sports all my life growing up, right? I played basketball and softball. Most of the time I didn't have time to dress up. And so when I got to college, it was one of those things where, you know, when you are not necessarily interested in, you know, saying sororities and getting into groups, where I was asked one time, like, why you don't dress up? Like, why you always wearing like basketball gear or like athletic gear all the time? But it has nothing to do with my expression of what I want to do. It has everything to do with I have practice at 5 a.m. all the way to 3 p.m. And then from class, I go to workout. From class, I go to study hall. But it was that perception because I didn't dress up all the time. So it just made me feel like I had to go overboard to wear a dress to school and then come back to change and go back and forth. Like I got tired of that. And I was like, I'm just gonna be who I am. And sometimes I like to dress up. Sometimes you're gonna catch me in J's in a hoodie. Like that's just how I feel. And my role is to help more and more people just live authentically themselves. But I definitely agree with it was a struggle for me, being a sports person.
Quick question, Courtney. Did people make assumptions about your sexual orientation based on your dress?
Still do.
Okay. And were you treated differently because of those assumptions?
Yes. It deterred my interest. And I say slight interest. I mean, very slight interest. It deterred my slight interest in the organization because I was like attacked by a group of people because I was on my way to the gym. So absolutely. It definitely were questioned, definitely just looked at differently. It's still sometimes to this day. You know, even from family, you know, when they're like, oh, you wearing a lot of sneakers this week. Like, okay, I like sneakers. What's wrong with wearing sneakers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing and being vulnerable about that. I know I asked personal questions. I would like to hear from one of the gentlemen in the room about the binary and see, have you experienced, if you've acted outside of the binary or done something differently that's in the binary, have you experienced discrimination, maybe projected homophobia, biphobia, or anything just based on solely, purely just being yourself, but maybe existing outside of this binary? Maybe doing something that's not considered masculine. How are you treated?
I can go. I think being in this field is the main answer. Yeah, just being in this field, I think there's a stigma that's associated with that as well. Especially because like it's considered, like, to some people, like I'm from the country, so it's considered like a soft career or like a soft, you know. So like it would be for nurturing, like anything that's kind of like in the nurturing profession is automatically assumed. Whether that's automatic assumptions that kind of come along with these types of roles that I play, especially being a counselor and training, for sure.
What are some of the things that you've heard?
Just so like just transparent, just like we don't want to hear all that emotional like BS or something like that, or just kind of like it ain't that deep, things like that. Just kind of being like, even being labeled as like too intuitive or being labeled as like too emotional, because that's not something that we automatically, you know, kind of associate ourselves with. So those are kind of some of those stigmas that you have to fight, especially when you are centered around family members who come from a very like country or like old time of context. So it's definitely difficult trying to navigate through that, for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Joshua. And you bring the point that one of the biggest things, right? Often in the longer training that I do, we talk about early messaging, right? And what are the impact of early messaging. When you think back, you know, and we say it unintentionally or we don't mean it, things like big boys don't cry, or girls don't do this. You know, we have very specific examples and we don't think about the impact of what that early messages look like, right? When we think back to early messages about LGBTQ people, right? Because we're talking about the LGBTQ experience. What are some of the early messages that you've heard, right? Gay is a sin, going to hell, sugar in your tank. I'm just going to say this word is a derogatory term, but the word faggot or fag, you know, things like that, right? Those are derogatory terms, but these are early words or messages that you've heard. What are some of the early messages that you have heard about LGBTQ people? And
you talking to me still?
Anybody, but
Oh.
you off mute, so you can share one. You from the country, right? So share one of these early messages that you've heard about LGBTQ people, and the earliest message you can think of.
Just like that, like, if you're gay, you're confused. It's a big one for sure.
Gay. How old were you, would you say, when you heard that message?
Probably like 5, 6.
5 or 6. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you, Jeff.
I know for me, I put it in the comments earlier. My grandmother used to tell me you can always tell the lesbians in church because they're the women's with the pants on. So we had to wear dresses, and I know now I even had to like do a little reprogramming when I need to dress up or I present. I don't have to wear a dress. I honestly feel more comfortable in pants. Because I can walk around, I don't have to worry about things showing and pulling things down. But that was something that she told me, I think when I was in the 3rd grade.
Third grade. So how old was that? Like 7? Was that?
Yeah, like 7, 8 maybe. So that was something that stuck with me, and I just realized like maybe like 5 years ago that that's not right at all. So I don't have to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, Andrea. Any other early messages?
Dr. Gibbons just said something in the group chat I related to.
I'm so sorry. I can't see.
I know. No, Dr. Jones keeping up with it. She's doing good, but she was saying about like buying like women in trucks, like in the cars you drive. Like, why you don't buy a car? Same here. I don't like cars. I like trucks or big SUVs, and so it's a conception when you get out of a car, like, well, whose truck is that? So yeah, absolutely.
I'm so sorry. I've been missing the group chat, y'all. It's like 60 messages up here. Y'all been going in, and I haven't been seeing any of this. I'm so sorry. Thank you all for using that, because I missed all of that. Those wonderful responses. But I wanted to kind of key in on just the fact when you think about early messaging and the ages that some of you just shared, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You're hearing, I would go to say, overwhelmingly negative messages about LGBTQ people, right? And what is that connection to how you perceived LGBTQ people? You wanted to say something, Kaylin?
Yes, I was just going to say one of the early messages that I was taught about LGBTQ individuals was that usually if a person identified as that, they were sexually touched by the opposite sex. And that's the reason why they decided to date the same sex or transition. And I didn't believe that always, but I also didn't kind of think into it as a child. I didn't think too much of it until I got older, and I have a family member who identifies within that community. So now when people say that, I get offended because I'm like, that's not true. Like, I never thought it was true, but I'm like, that's not true. Some people, that's not everybody's experience, but that's one of the earliest things I heard, that because an individual was, sexually touched by the opposite sex or the same sex, this has caused them to decide to be a part of the LGBTQ community or whatever the case may be. I grew up in the South as well, so that's one of the things we were taught in the South.
Yeah.
And to Kaylin's point, not to interrupt, but to Kaylin's point, people don't say that about like straight people. I mean, not straight, excuse me, cisgendered people who may have been touched by someone of the opposite sex and be like, oh, well, that's why, you date, if you were a girl and you got touched by your uncle, that's why you date men now. Like, it's never that correlation with cisgendered people, but with LGBTQ people, it is that. And then cisgendered people are sexually assaulted at a lot higher rates from various studies than LGBTQ people. So it's never that correlation. And I'm like, Kaylin, it bothers me every time someone brings that up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you for introducing that term. I know you said it a little bit earlier. Just to be clear, for people who may not be familiar with the term cisgender, cisgender basically means that you agree with or are in line with the sex that you were born, that you were assigned at birth, right? Therefore, you were assigned a male at birth and you say, you know what? I I do identify as male. I am. That is a cisgender person. The opposite of that would be a transgender person, right? A person who was assigned male at birth does not identify as male and therefore identifies as female. They would be a transgender person. So cisgender came out as a term to kind of not counteract, but like the opposite of what transgender would mean. So a person could be cisgender and gay. A person could be cisgender and heterosexual. Or a person could be, trans and trans attracted to another person. So there's lots of different terminology. I'm not going to confuse y'all, but I just wanted to kind of highlight because Kalisa used the term cisgender to just make sure that we all understood what that meant. So thank you all for sharing your early messages, right? And that making that connection between how early messages can impact how we view LGBTQ people. And sometimes when you hear overwhelmingly negative messages, as you can see, as the data that I shared at the very beginning, how this impacts how we see people, right? The victimization, the physical assault, the bullying, the harassment, the policy making, the advocacy, right? And so we've talked a lot about things like really on like micro level, like direct level services. And so as we move towards the end of our discussion, because I think we'll be done by 11:30. I know y'all want to talk to me all Saturday morning. Is that we really want to look at like how we can support LGBTQ youth on the individual level. It really starts with our own knowledge, our beliefs, and our actions, right? And so many of you have expressed interest in special skills or specializations post-graduation or during, right? And so in order to do that, you have to go to what? You have to get education, you have to get training, you have to get information around that, right? You want to be a forensic social worker, that requires special training. You want to be a clinical social worker, that requires training and licensing. And so, but you realize the importance in getting that information so that you can have your specialty. If you want to work with LGBTQ people, you should do the same, right? You need to get that knowledge. You need to get that education. You need to begin to address any bias that you may have, unintentional or intentional, and then put it into action by starting to have affirmative stance and behaviors on how to address those issues. On an organizational level, right? For those agencies that you work at, and y'all had some really, really great agencies, hospitals and community health places, all of those things. You want to look at your agency policies. You want to look at what the staff training entails. And you also want to look at what the agency practices are. I think that was Courtney that talked about the school dress policy. Something as simple as a dress code or dress policy, really fleshing that out and seeing what that says. You even want to make sure that your agency has protections for you as a staff or a worker. Like, are you protected that I cannot be discriminated against based on my own identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, or experience? And then from the community level, we want to look at interagency resource sharing and advocacy. Who are those agencies in the community that I can connect with? It may not be in your immediate community, but we have the age of the internet, we have Zoom, we have all kinds of things. Are you reaching out to agencies? Are you asking for that assistance? Are you looking at the leading people on that topic and really reaching out and seeing what resources they have? When I started this type of work, there are so many free trainings, there are lots of conferences, and there's so much material online that's downloadable and shareable for you to kind of educate yourself and share and replicate within your agency. That goes to policy advocacy, community organizations as well. The reason why we're talking about this is really talking about coaching people or families or staff and working with youth, right? And so this is an example from the Family Acceptance Project. It's one of the first research projects on LGBTQ experiences, and it talks about the level of family rejection and how if you can see on the right side, there's high rejection. People who are highly rejected, LGBTQ people who are highly rejected, are 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. Highly rejected. Highly rejecting behaviors look like what? Throw some out really quick. Picking our kids out, physical abuse, name calling, mental abuse. Those are highly rejecting behaviors. If you look to the left a little bit in the middle, there's a part that says moderate rejection, from just a shift from highly rejecting behaviors to moderate rejecting behaviors, whatever that means. It's reduced almost by 5 times. Just from that small shift, how many lives are saved? Just that small shift, right? So that's the importance when we're talking about coaching parents, coaching staff on how to have accepting behaviors. It really is life or death. It really is. Part of that is debunking myths and coaching families around that, coaching staff around that, being able to speak to that. Is this a choice? How many of y'all heard that before? You know, especially when talking about trans individuals. It's a whole lot of conversation around that. And many of the conversations that are having are coming from people who are not of trans experience, right? And so you're having conversations about things and people that you don't have the knowledge of or experience of, and then creating policies around that. What caused this? Is that really important to know? As Kelisa brought up, you know, when people are talking about, or I think it was I'm so sorry, I forgot her name. She brought up molestation as often as a result of be identifying as LGBTQ, and that is a myth. That's not the case. Is this a sign of mental illness? So often, what I've learned recently, often some people use the term gay or lesbian. The practice is really leaning away from the term homosexual. For some of you who may not know, homosexual used to be in the DSM. And so it does have a negative connotation. Not to say that there aren't people who are from the community who still use the term homosexual, right? But when we think about best practice, you want to use the terminology and the identity that that person has shared with you. Is this a ploy to get attention? I hear that a lot within schools, you know, especially when they're talking about youth who are curious or bi-curious and experiencing different things. Are they too young to know? There are studies that show that girls know as young as like 3 or 4 that they feel different. And boys, maybe like around 5 or 6, just knowing that they feel different. A kid is not going to come up to you at 5 years old and says, I'm trans. Well, they may now because they watch TikTok and all of that stuff. But generally, they may show up in play. It may show up in dress. It may show up in different ways, right? And there's important ways to think about that when they're thinking about, what is it? Consistent, insistent, and persistent, right? When thinking about trans experiences of young people. Is this just a phase? Can you wait? Often parents or families use fear of harm or safety as a way to restrict LGBTQ people. You know, I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to be in the community. I don't want somebody to do something to you. So dress less gay, or you can't dress in the clothing that aligns with how you express yourself for fear of safety. And part of that, as you can see, that is a highly rejecting behavior and contributes to suicide attempts. Answering questions around what does this mean for me as a parent, and does my child need counseling or therapy, right? So these are really important questions for you to consider when engaging in this work. And last but not least, I want to kind of lead to this interprofessional collaboration piece that you all are really focusing on and how to do this. To speak to my journey, if you're ever thinking about going into, you know, DEI work or LGBT inclusion work, it's really important to do a needs assessment, right? Have you, any of you have any experience with a needs assessment, what that looks like? Have seen it through your agency? Data is important. I don't know if any of you are data heavy or going to go to PhD. Data is important. Data supports your stance. It speaks to the need. Data also helps you get funding. So I work at the Department of Social Services, and I wrote a $1 million grant by doing a needs assessment within the agency. We also saw in several sites across the nation that, especially with people of color, they're overrepresented in foster care and other systems of care, and that generally they also are more than 50% identify as LGBTQ, right? If you don't know that about the population that you serve, about the demographics, and you also don't have effective policies or practices, then are you really serving them, right? Like how many of your agencies know the number of people that you're serving that may identify as LGBTQ. How many of you have LGBTQ people on your caseloads or in your classrooms or in your emergency rooms? Okay, Andrea, you know. So that's what I saw. So and so also you want to think about after the needs assessment, how to formulate that, right? You want to get administration and staff buy-in. You want to go to the leaders within your organization. You want to let them know what your needs assessment has said, and you want to get buy-in from staff. Like, you know, if you all work at the same organization and more than 30 to 50% of your cases identify as LGBTQ, but we have no LGBTQ specific services, then that's an issue. If you have a high Spanish speaking population, right? Your agency has what? Language lines, interpreters, all of these different things. We have after hours. You have all of these different things. Why? Because it's shown that it speaks to a need. You want to look at community stakeholders. Who in your community has stake in this? Who can help you achieve your goal? For me, it was the Human Rights Campaign. It was CASA volunteers. There were lots of organizations who wanted to participate in this new kind of leading data, which hasn't been released yet, but we did a lot of the work. You want to look at local policies and guidelines. If you're working in systems of care, you want to see if the state, a lot of times people start with like COMAR regulations, any kind of ethical or professional guidelines for social work, you know, got code of ethics. I'm not familiar with clinical counseling code of ethics. I'm sure you all have some board or something, a licensing board. Like, look at local policies and guidelines to help kind of lead the direction of where you're going. Again, funding, you want to find people who are offering services for that. The Children's Bureau gave lots of money a few years ago, specifically the Children's Bureau is a federal agency that kind of these guidelines that federally regulate the services that we provide to help support LGBTQ inclusion work. And again, community resources and national resources. So this is just a way to kind of think about that interprofessional collaboration if you want to begin that work, starting with the needs assessment and moving forward. Yolanda said, Kemp just signed Bill 140 into law a few days ago. Would you like to share a little bit about what the Bill 140 is?
So it criminalizes doctors from performing gender affirming anything to anyone under 18, including hormone replacement therapy. So that's the general proponent of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yolanda. And so what that speaks to, again, is that often there's another myth I didn't list, is that people say, oh, LGBTQ people have, you know, so many advancements. They get everything and this is that, and they have these special privileges. But you can see if you dig a little deeper, you do the research, you kind of read through that there still is a long way to go. It is 11:30, so I'm going to stop talking because I want to respect you all's time. But I appreciate your participation, your engagement, the stories that you shared with me today. I hope that you learned something from today. I learned a lot. I just want to know that when I go back and talk to my other social work colleagues, I can say that I met a group of some dynamic people today who are going to enter in the field and do some amazing work. And so I will share my contact information if you all have questions. If you ever in Baltimore, that's where I live, you want to come through. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. We appreciate it. We can throw some comments and things in the chat. We want to give a few minutes just for if someone has some burning questions that they like to ask or any comments, just for that. And then just one more second, if you could get them edges together, because Mr. Quiones and Ms. Bonds want to make sure we take some pictures.
Get your edges together.
Yeah, get it together, Miss Edges. Edges are important. You see Mr. Simpson, he got them.
I know I did. It was right? I need to go get mine together.
He got the whole setup going on. Did anybody have any questions?
Does he have Mr. Morgan, do you have a LinkedIn that you can drop in the chat?
I do not have a LinkedIn. I'm not a LinkedIn type of guy, but I will share my email with you all.
He got a Finsta though. He'll share something. He'll share something. But we will. Ms. Campbell will definitely send out a follow-up. Ms. Campbell, are you with us? She's here.
I am.
Yay! She'll drop the evaluation in the chat in just a moment. Because you want to make sure we do the evaluation just so we can get feedback. Did you have anything you wanted to add or share with our scholars?